Welcome to Retire Coast, where we discuss all things retirement, life on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and your financial welfare. Bill Anderson, your host, is a serial entrepreneur having created many successful businesses and holds a real estate broker's license, speaks about personal experiences with each topic. Listen, learn, and improve the quality of your life.
Thank you for returning to Retire Coast podcast. We're going to talk today about buying a condo or a townhome, some type of attached property that is part of a larger complex. In other words, you are part of an HOA. Thank you for returning to Retire Coast. Our topic today is going to be about high-rise and even low-rise condos and townhomes that are part of a multi-unit organization such as an HOA. Before you consider buying that condo on the beach, I want you to carefully consider what I'm going to explain to you here. What happens to some people is they look at the price and they say, hey, that's great, or it's a good price, and I want that condo because it's where I want to be. And then you start to add up the costs, and it seems you can afford it. You know what the HOA fees are, you know what the taxes, and if there's any insurance, you've got all that covered. And you add it all up and say, yeah, I can make that payment, or I can afford to pay cash for the property, and I can make these monthly payments as we go along. The main question to ask, the information that's usually not provided, at least right up front, is what about the deferred maintenance on the property? Are there funds available to make repairs 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road? That roof will have to get replaced at some point in time. The building will need to be painted. There are other maintenance items that are required for that property to keep it in a condition that's safe to live in. And that doesn't count a storm that might come by, like a hurricane, if you happen to live near the beach, that might do some damage. What happens then? Is the insurance adequate to cover anything that may occur there, or will the association owners, such as you, have to cough up some cash to be able to make the difference, such as a large deductible? Those are questions you need to ask, and you need to get answers in writing on these. I will bring to your attention what happened in Florida. Many people remember reading in the news a few years ago about that condo complex. It was a large building that collapsed right around where the swimming pool was, and it killed a few people. The state found out that the building required maintenance. It had not been inspected, if I recall correctly, and the maintenance was not done, and the funds weren't available to do the maintenance in any case. It's probably one of the reasons it wasn't done. Now, that was not an aberration. What the state of Florida did is send out inspectors to other buildings like that, and they found many of them requiring a lot of maintenance to keep the structure of the building intact. And that doesn't even count the paint or the look of the property itself, at least from the outside. It doesn't discuss the air conditioning systems on the roof. It doesn't discuss all kinds of other things. They were just looking at the structure of the building and found out that the buildings needed a lot of work. Then they started looking into the reserves that the associations are required by most states to have for future repairs, and the reserves were wholly lacking. Now, what happens with the reserves, let me explain that to you, is that the HOAs are required in many states, but not all, to have a reserve study. That means they have to hire professionals to come out and take a look at all the buildings, at the landscaping, for example, swimming pools, etc., and then they come up with an estimate of what it'll cost to maintain that building, say, for the next 10 years, maybe even longer than that, 15, 20 years. And they explain to the board that they're going to have to collect X dollars per month per unit in order to make all of these changes. And they usually adjust for what they believe will be the inflation rate in the future. Now, without doubt, since we were sitting in an inflationary period where the rate was less than 1.5% for almost a decade, they probably used a lower number. That put a lot of these properties in trouble when we hit 9%, 9.5%. We're back down to around 3.5% now, but even that was higher than it had been for some time. So the inflationary impact on these reserve studies is causing a lot of these associations to actually go out and get another reserve study to bring these up to date. Well, everybody hates it when the association comes back with an increase in the dues, but they hate it even worse when they come up with a special assessment. And this is not uncommon. In fact, I'd like to say it's almost common. It happened to me. I bought a property. It was a 4-bedroom, 3-bath townhome, pretty good size, out in California. And it was one of 4 in a building, and there were a number of buildings in the complex. And before I bought it, they had done a reserve study and found out that they needed to replace the roof. In fact, they needed to replace it almost immediately. So they informed everyone that there would be a special assessment. I think it was at that time, around $10,000. Well, when I went to buy the property, the people that sold me the property did not tell me that the assessment had been voted on and approved, and it was going to happen. So about 9 months after I moved in, we were hit with this special assessment. Now, the previous owners knew about it, and I did have legal recourse to go after them, but frankly, they didn't have 2 nickels to rub together, as the saying goes, when they sold the property, so I was not going to spend a lot of money with lawyers trying to get $10,000 back. Nevertheless, I was out of pocket for that money, which I could afford at the time, and I didn't like it, but I could. So we ended up with a new roof. That was fine with me. Having a nice new roof was good. But going in to the property, and we had asked the question, and they said no. So what you need to do is not only ask the sellers to disclose this, which is required in most states, you need to contact the association and check with them and see if there's anything on the horizon. It may be that there's something under discussion that is likely to occur 2 or 3 or 4 months or 5 months down the road that could set you way back. Some of these assessments can be brutally large, in the 20,000, 30,000 range, and the associations often don't have any financing arrangements set up. They leave that to you. They will expect to see your funds on a certain date. Well, what happens with some people is they can't afford it. They are retired, and they were hoping that they could deal with the association dues increases over time and with taxes and insurance, and now they get hit with this large assessment, and this pretty much tells them they have to get out. So they end up putting their property up for sale, and that reduces the price, and someone like you come to buy it and think, hey, that's a good deal on that property, and they don't tell you that there's a big assessment coming. Maybe it wasn't such a good deal. On the other hand, if you are buying into a complex that has a special assessment already assessed on the property that requires you to make maybe a higher payment every month, maybe that's what they did. They went out and borrowed the money from somebody, and you're paying the interest and all that. And what you can do then is negotiate in the purchase process so that they end up paying you the entire amount of the assessment by selling the property to you at a lower rate, or in some cases giving you some cash back at closing to be able to cover that cost. But that only takes care of what's going on at the moment, things that anyone knows about, even if there hasn't been any discussion. But what you need to ask the association is, I need to see a copy of the reserve study, and I want to know when you did the last one and when are you going to do the next one. So dig into this. Get this information, particularly if you are going to be retiring there, because you're going to be hit with increasing property taxes over time. The insurance is going to go up, and if the association is paying for that insurance, then your association dues will go up as a result if they're paying for the outside, and then you'll end up paying for the inside coverage. That's typically how that works. And the other costs are going to go up as well. So you have to plan for all of those things. But what I'm trying to get at here is don't be surprised by some huge special assessment, or that you're buying into a property that's not been properly maintained and there's a potential for an assessment. The best thing I can suggest is that when you have your building inspector go out as part of the evaluation process, have them take a look at the buildings themselves, and not just yours, but the ones around you and the landscaping and all those things. If there are broken sidewalks that weren't taken care of, the gates don't work, other things like that, so they can let you know what they think about the condition of the property, not just your unit. Now, typically they will do that, but that'll help you. It'll give you something to talk about with the sellers and also with the HOA. So get into it. Understand what you're going to be setting yourself up for. And if you're satisfied that everything's going to work out fine, then move forward and buy the property. If you're not, if you're any doubt at all about what's going to happen in the future and you can't get the right answers, then move on to the next property. As I alluded to a minute ago, some people will be hit with a large assessment and they can't afford to stay there. Now, the smart ones will sell as soon as possible, but others will not. There will be foreclosures in the property, and that causes economic pressure on everyone else that lives there, because some of those properties will not be taken care of, and the association will end up with a shortfall in the amount that they need to fund it. Also, they'll be spending money on attorneys to try to collect that money. Now, some states are passing laws now that prevent the associations from foreclosing on association dues. Frankly, I think that is a mistake. I think the states ought to stay out of that completely. Because if someone owes association dues and they aren't paying it, then you are. And that's not fair. And there has to be a remedy to that. Now, I have owned many properties in associations over the years, including my own home right now in an association. And we have people who haven't paid. And we go on for nearly a year asking them and sending them letters and calling them and doing everything possible to try to work with them to get that money paid. And if it's a lot of money, then we tell them, well, just pay us a little piece here and a little piece there, and we'll take care of it. Over a period of time, you'll get it paid off. So before it comes to the foreclosure point there, a lot of work has been done, so it's nothing new. And those complaints that you hear, most of them just are not responsible from the individuals who are complaining. Now, I'm circling back here. I don't want to get into all of this with the HOA, except to say that if there's problems with that property and many people can't afford to pay the large assessment, then you'll end up paying their share of the assessment. So let's say the assessment is $10,000 and you've got 20% of the people that aren't going to be able to pay it. You may end up paying another $2,000 or $3,000. You're paying their share. Now, associations attempt to get paid when the property is sold by putting a lien on that property. Sometimes that works and sometimes it does not. Sometimes those liens don't get picked up when they go through the closing process and the people end up skipping out. Sometimes the liens don't get placed in time when the property is sold and they end up losing out. But in the end, if you aren't prepared to pick up the tab for your neighbors, then don't move into a property that you believe is going to require some serious maintenance over time. And it looks like the reserve study says, hey, we're not going to be able to fund this without a substantial increase in the HOA fees or a new special assessment to help catch up with higher association fees after that. Costs are going to continue to go up, and you need to plan for this in advance. So as I say once again, don't just jump at that property because it's in the ideal location. It's exactly what you want. It's really attractive. The price is good. Do your homework. Otherwise, you may regret this down the road. And you know what I always say is, let's say you found a condo and you wanted to put an offer in on it. By the time you did, it was sold. So I say, well, you found that one, you'll find another one. And that's always the case. It just is. So that one that was perfect and that was the only one, you keep looking, you'll find one that may even be better. Often it is. And then you'll say, hey, that was a good deal. So you need to move into a well-managed property too. That's another point I want to get to, is the management of the HOA. Has it turned over a number of times? And I'll explain one HOA here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, pretty good size one. And these are properties. They're about 4 into a building, and there are maybe 30 of them there in that particular complex. They have seen 3 changes of management in 1 year, and that's not good, because you need to be able to trust that the funding for that property has been accounted for properly. And here's another example. In the HOA where I live, we only pay $60 a year. It's not that much. But the person who volunteered to be the bookkeeper liked to gamble. We have casinos here. She gambled a substantial portion of the funds, and the other members didn't see it because this person was basically an accountant and she was able to hide it. So if you have any doubts whatsoever about the accounting on that property, maybe there's been a couple of changes in management over time, then you need to get copies of the records, which you are entitled to, and you can pass those on to a CPA that you know that can take a look at them and give you an evaluation before you plunk down your hard-earned cash and buy that property. So once again, be sure that that management company is doing what they're supposed to be doing, and that the books are accurate, and that tax returns have been properly filed for it as well. One last thing, and I'm going to just barely touch on the HOA rules here. A lot of people complain about the HOAs, and they do so after they buy the property. You should be provided, before you buy the property, by the current owner, a copy of the HOA rules. Read them. Now, there may be 20 pages, 30 pages, 40 pages. Read every single page. If you disagree with what you see, don't buy the property. If you think that those rules make sense to you, and this is a place that you'd like to live with those rules, then if everything else lines up, by all means, put that money down and close that deal. But a lot of people don't read the association bylaws. They don't understand what's required of an owner, and some owners want to do something with their property when they're in the buying process, think it'll just be okay, or they'll just do it. They'll just get away with it. Nobody will care. And then they move in and they painted their door purple when that was a violation of the association. They just did it anyway. They didn't check. They didn't go through the architectural committee. And then they get a notice that they have to repaint the door. And they get upset about it. And sometimes this leads to attorneys talking back and forth. It's just stupid. If they had read the rules and followed those rules, there might have been an opportunity to paint the door a color that was acceptable to them and to the association by going through the process. But instead, in this case I'm giving you, that's what they did. Now, that happened in my association. People painted their shutters purple, and it just looks strange when you drive by the street. So the association contacted them and said, please repaint them. Here are the colors that are acceptable, and if you don't, we'll fine you. Well, they did. They repainted them, but what a waste of time. Now, if you want a place where you can go in and paint them any color, that's fine, and you should be able to read the bylaws that allow that. But if the bylaws don't allow something that you want in there, such as animals, for example, or the ability to short-term rent your property, almost anything else that you think is going to make that uncomfortable for you, do not buy that property. The chances of you getting the bylaws changed are slim and none. Your neighbors are used to living with them, and that's the way it's going to be. So all you'll do is end up fighting, and you'll be one of those people who write about it on Facebook and other media about how bad the association treated you. Just don't go there if you think that it's uncomfortable for you. Another thing you might want to do is contact some of the neighbors of that property that you're going to buy. Knock on the door. Talk to them. Say, how do you like living here? Is the HOA a criminal enterprise? I'm just kidding here. Or is it this is a great place to live and people love it and the swimming pool is always taken care of and the dog stuff is picked up by the neighbors, etc. Or no, it's not, and they don't pull the weeds, etc. Know this. You'll get it right from the neighbors. They'll let you know. And then they'll size you up too. And you might say, well, gee, I don't know if I want to live next to these people. This is the Beverly Hillbillies, for example. They don't, mow their grass, or they don't pull their weeds, and their property just looks nasty all the time. Well, then, pick another condo in that development, or decide not to go there. But again, meeting the neighbors is going to give you a lot of information that you won't hear from necessarily the association or the seller itself. Well, that's all I want to talk about today. There's a lot about buying into multi-unit properties that we could discuss, but I think I gave you enough information to at least stop you in your tracks if you're about to buy a property based on emotion and you have not done proper due diligence. Remember, you're going to be living there for a long time, so do what you can to make sure that the place that you selected is someplace that you can afford to stay in and that you'll enjoy it into the future. The last thing you want to do is spend money on attorneys and argue and get into a spat with your spouse, for example, about whose decision it was to buy this property. Well, again, thank you for coming to Retire Coast, our podcast. Please go to our website, retirecoast.com, where we have lots of articles on a variety of things dealing with finance, retirement, and we talk a little bit about properties in there, different kinds, about financing, everything you probably need to know in order to buy a condo or any other type of property, and also what do you do when you own it. Please come back and listen to other podcasts from Retire Coast and go to our website, as I mentioned, retirecoast.com, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks.